Hi, St. Paul. It's Pastor Clark, and today we're going to do some Bible study. This time on the Gospel of John, the first chapter. Last week, and on Sunday, we considered the Gospel of Mark, chapter 1. And so we kind of get side by side different pictures and portrayals of John the Baptist. Still in this mode, this typical Advent mode. You know, the themes of watching and waiting and working to prepare are there. And the gospel kind of pre-Jesus gospel picture is what we get. But you'll see that, Mark kind of got right to the point, and John, we're going to skip a lot of the verses, but John has a much more, divine, Jesus as divine frame to put around the introduction of Jesus, which we're getting to, and that plays out in this introduction to John. So yeah, let's get into it. We'll see some of the differences. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. John himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. Now, these couple of verses follow, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And there's this kind of rhapsodizing about the Word and it being light and life to all people, and has come to dwell among us, and we have seen his glory. So that's kind of the way John introduces, the Gospel of John introduces Jesus. And then now what we hear is John's introduction of John the Baptist. So there's a much more mystical framework, much more metaphorical, kind of less concrete, and more godly, kind of emphasizing Jesus's divine nature, while Mark emphasizes Jesus's human nature. There's no fancy birth stories or in the beginning gobbledygook for Mark. But for John, this theme of light will play out through the whole gospel. And Jesus is that light. And John is not the light. Okay, he's come to testify to the light. Already there's a way that we can identify with John there. That we are not the light, but we can testify to the light. Very important for John, the Gospel of John, to establish that John, just like Jesus, was sent from God. Later we'll hear Jesus talking to people about being born from above, or from God, or born again. Sometimes there's almost like a double entendre in the original language of Greek here, but there's that emphasis, a man sent from God. Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes I could use some confirmation or some really explicit. A lot of the hustle and bustle of life can make it hard to determine what is from God and what is not, who is from God and who is not. There's a certainty in the gospel. Now, Mark was the first gospel, probably written around, the late 60s. That's 0060, not 1960, or 70s, early 70s. And the Gospel of John is written 30, maybe 40 years later, a whole generation later. So it may reflect the kind of development of the faith and this particular community, that certainty that John, the Gospel of John carries. So anyway, here's the testimony. This is the testimony given by John when the Jews sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask him, "Who are you?" So right off the bat, we kind of have a bit of a conflict. It's probably harder to tell in the English and in our culture. Questions can be honest questions, but a question asked in public was always a challenge, always a confrontation in that time and place. And we already know, we the readers already know who John is. John is from God, one who's come to testify to the light. But that's not apparent. I was just talking about the hustle and bustle in life and not always knowing who is from God and who is not. That's not evident to these folks here who have come, the priests and Levites from Jerusalem. From Jerusalem is kind of a it's almost oppositional. John is a man sent from God, and here are people sent from Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the center of political and religious authority, and so John already sets up this conflict that being from God does not mean being from Jerusalem, and being from Jerusalem does not mean being from God. Who are you? Is the question. John confessed and did not deny it, but confessed, "I am not the Messiah." And they asked him, "What then? Are you Elijah?" So perhaps they're confused. They perhaps approach him because they do think he is the Messiah. Maybe that's what John guesses when he's asked, "Who are you?" But we know that already. He's not the light. He came to testify to the light. And so John says, "No, I'm not the Messiah." "What then? Are you Elijah?" And he said, "I'm not." And they asked him, "Are you the prophet?" And he answered, "No." So 3 no's. John's asked who he is, and John answers, "No, no, no. Not that one, not those, not them." I want to come back to that. I'm remembering a book I once read about the power of a positive no. What's a positive no? A positive no is a no that is in service to a larger yes. Now, this book was talking about kind of how we, where we put our time and our effort, what we do and don't do. A positive no, these are positive no's for John. He's saying, "I'm not the light, I'm not the light, I'm not the light. I've come to testify to the light." So here that is, the next one. Finally, maybe they're fed up. Then they say to John, "Who are you? Let's have an answer for those who sent us. What do you say about yourself?" Now again, for those who sent us, are just reminding us that these are not people who are sent from God. They're sent from Jerusalem. I don't know. I don't know if there's any cynicism or whatever. If people are sent from Des Moines, maybe you have a job that relates to the state in some way, and people come from Des Moines, and they have their agendas and their ways of doing things that may not match up or be in sync with what we're up to. There's just kind of a bit of a reminder that these folks are out of sync with God. So what do you say about yourself? They asked. And Jesus said, I am the voice of one crying out in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord, as the prophet Isaiah said. Now, this is just one example about how rooted in the Old Testament the New Testament is. You know, we didn't read the in the beginning was the word, but that just matches in the beginning in Genesis. Here is a reference to Isaiah, and so just the same Isaiah referenced in the same way as in Mark, the Gospel of Mark, which we heard last week, and also Matthew. The Gospels are kind of making this claim that Jesus is the culmination of the Jewish tradition, and yet these Jewish leaders do not recognize him as such. Now, we do not carry that. I wouldn't carry that over in a polemical way or a judging way on Jews today. But to notice that there was certainly a lot of tension back then in that time, not just Jesus's time, but John's time when John was writing, between this new Christian community that was kind of separating from its Jewish roots. But still, there's this claim that John the Baptist makes and that the Gospels are making, that here is a fulfillment of God's promises. The same work that God was doing at the beginning continues now in Jesus. Now, they had been sent from the Pharisees. All right, so now this is the fourth time when that verb sent, that word sent, sent from the Pharisees specifically. It's kind of drawing out what would be what will be the chief enemy in a way, or those who embody this tension the most of being from God and not, or not recognizing that Jesus is from God. That's really a core to what it for John, the Gospel of John, means to believe into Jesus. So they're kind of reminding us, maybe asking us to empathize or give some, just be patient with them. You know, now these guys are from the Pharisees. You gotta understand where they're coming from, in a way, almost an apology. But I don't know, maybe that's not the intention, but it makes me laugh. Anyway, they asked him, why then are you baptizing if you are neither the Messiah nor Elijah nor the prophet? So they're confused. John answers them, I baptize with water. Among you stands one whom you do not know, the one who is coming after me. I'm not worthy to untie the thong of his sandal. And this took place in Bethany, across the Jordan where John was baptizing. So that's the first we hear of baptizing in this section. And that baptizing is what raised their expectation that John might be the Messiah or the prophet. So there is a sense that they do suspect that, you know, they know that something's up, and they're trying to figure it out. So maybe the gospel is inviting us to give them some credit. But I want to go back to these no's. Who am I? No. Is John's answer, this power of a positive no. And just noticing how powerful it can be to really know who we are and what we are called to do in the world, who we are called to be in the world. And not go chasing after what looks good or will win us security and esteem and control in our lives or in the world. No, 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 John says, because John knows what his place is. I've been reading, accidentally, I've been giving you new resources every day or every Bible study during these weeks in Advent. And this time I'm going to share with you this book, The Interior Castle by St. Teresa of Avila. It's a book that I have read and loved before, but it's out in a new translation. Teresa of Avila was what people call today a mystic. She was a nun in the 1600s in Spain. So she wrote in Spanish, and this is translated into English. This is a new translation, a recent translation by Mirabai Starr. And it's looked to by many to be a guide to the interior life, kind of starting from zero all the way up. It's called The Interior Castle because she talks about our soul is actually heaven within us, God's dwelling place within us. And there are many dwelling places. Jesus says it in John, there are many dwelling places. I go to prepare a place for you. So she sort of picks that up. She had a vision of this great crystal or diamond castle as the soul, and there being 7 distinct dwelling places, meaning almost stages of growth in the spiritual life, in prayer, in holiness. And so that's what the interior castle is all about. And I was reading today in the 6th dwelling place, so kind of far along. And she talks kind of one chapter after the other about how God can come to us, whether it's through these consolations, which are just these feelings of peace and being loved and belonging, through these kind of intellectual, she call them, like intellectual visions or something. And she's talking specifically about another specific kind of vision that God can give to people. God kind of gives a rapture or like a lightning bolt, just this vision that sticks in the mind. Not a voice, maybe a voice plus a vision, but anyway, helping us understand the interior life. If that seems far beyond, remember this is the 6th mansion, as we sometimes call it. But I want to, going back to this sense of the power of a positive no, I want you to hear what she says about this after she's talked about this vision for a while. She says, if you hear that God has granted this favor to other souls, do not beseech them, do not ask them to lead you the same way. It may seem to you to be a very good path, a path to be desired and admired, but there are a few reasons why it would not be wise to ask for it. Now again, she's talking about visions in a specific kind of way that God shows up in someone's interior life or prayer life, spiritual life, and why we ought not try to emulate other people necessarily or try to follow their path. Why John, I think that's true in our exterior lives too, and the way that kind of spill over from interior life to exterior life, and what we choose to do and what we set our goals as and what we're trying to accomplish. She's cautioning us, perhaps to say no. Then these are the reasons she gives. Why it would be not wise, maybe, to shoot for the moon, like John is not shooting for the moon. First, it shows a lack of humility to demand what you have not earned. I wonder if that's something that was going through John's mind. She goes on to say, I believe that these visions will never be granted to those who crave them. God first gives the soul depth of knowledge. So, she's saying we can't skip any steps, and it wouldn't be wise to skip any steps. She's almost saying that we wouldn't know what to do with these gifts, even if we received them. Maybe you've had that experience in life of attaining something that you maybe wanted for a really long time, and then you received it and you didn't know what to do with it. You weren't ready for it, as if you had skipped some steps. So the another reason to say no. A soul in desire is in greater danger of being deceived. And the next one is like it. Third, when there is a great desire, the imagination itself tricks you. Both of these warnings, reasons to say no. Or here, John is not deceived. First of all, he has the humility to know what his path is not, what his path is. That's something for someone else. This Messiah, this one who baptizes with more than water, and he's not going to be deceived, and he's not going to let his imagination trick him either. I've been a victim of my own imagination and been deceived at times by others because of my own desires to do great and heroic things. Fourth, and a reason to say no, wouldn't it be rather presumptuous of me to try to choose my own path? I should leave the arrangements to the beloved, to God, who knows me and who will lead me along a path that is right for me. May God's will be done in all things. And these are words that I could imagine John saying. Maybe someone said to John, part of what Teresa is talking about here, that we should all have human people who are our guides, our spiritual guides. Mine is named Marie Yergi, a pastor from upstate New York and a former bishop, and she is my guide, my spiritual director, someone who has had some of these spiritual experiences, but even more so has the gift of discernment, and has had some education, some broadening of a perspective, and can understand these things and be a guide and maybe an interpreter. Keep us honest so that it's God who's choosing our path for us. It might have been easy for John to say, yeah, you know what? I am the Messiah, and strut around and maybe even get these folks from Jerusalem to buy into it. And who knows? Certainly that would have won him some esteem, some sense of power. But he says no. The fifth reason to say no to a path that's not yours. Do you think the trials suffered by the souls whom God does grant these visions are light ones? No, they are massive and they're manifold. How do you know if you would even be able to bear them? Reminiscent of when James and John, or James and John's mother, depending on the gospel you read, come to Jesus and say, grant us to sit at your right hand or your left hand. Maybe see these grand gifts that we want to attain or things that we want to have. Jesus's answer to them was, can you drink the cup that I drink from? Can you be baptized with the baptism that I'm going to be baptized with? Talking obviously about the cross. And they say, yes, of course, Lord. And he says, all right, well, we'll find out. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. We may think that folks who have seem more spiritual than we are, we'll keep it in the language of Teresa of Avila, that they have somehow gone beyond doubt and struggle and suffering. Quite the opposite, Teresa of Avila says. They have their own trials. And to whom later on she says, souls who receive these favors have a greater obligation to serve. There's a higher bar for them. Sixth, another reason to say no to a path that's not yours, a path that God is not leading you on. You may discover that the very thing you hoped would bring you bounty brings you only privation, brings you emptiness instead of fullness, just like when Saul lost everything to become king. 6 reasons she gives us for saying no, and a lot of deep wisdom in this. And wisdom, who do you think is the spiritual guide that John had? We don't hear much about John's forerunners or the people that were part of John's community. Who are the people who helped keep John honest to this calling, who helped him discover this calling in the first place and make the distinction between being the light versus being the one who testifies to the light? Who are those people in your life? If you don't have any, find some. By all means, I think the church is rich with them. Some wise people in prayer. Let me know. Call me up. Drop me a line if you need some help with that. So 6 reasons she gives, and she goes on to say this, and I'll close with this. There are even more reasons than these, friends. Believe me, the safest thing is to want only what God wants. God knows better than us. God knows better than we know ourselves. Let me say that again. God knows us better than we know ourselves. And God loves us. Let's place ourselves in God's hands so that God's will may be done in us. If we consciously maintain this intention, we cannot go wrong. Teresa of Avila. I think this is the wisdom we see in John the Baptist. So let that be part of the work that we do in these Advent days, to consciously maintain this intention, to want only what God wants, so that God's will may be done in us. We cannot go wrong with that work. Thanks be to God.